This episode is presented by Perlage Systems.
This is just a little bit about carbonation. I'm Brian Johnson, and in this episode of Better Cocktails at Home, we're talking about carbonation. Now, over the next few episodes, we're going to really focus on carbonation, how you use it in cocktails, just how it interacts with different alcohols and waters, and just really kind of looking at it and seeing what it does. And I think this first episode, I want to talk a little bit kind of about the science behind it, because I think that provides a really good basis for applying it to cocktails. There's a few things I want to talk about that can really affect carbonation in a cocktail and how it comes across when you make it in a drink. So the first one is glassware. One of the ways that a liquid will lose CO2 and therefore become flat, if you will, is by the interface between the air and the liquid. If you use a nice tall glass like this, there's, as you can tell, a minimal amount of air contact with the actual liquid, so you're going to lose less CO2. Now, if you have a coupe, it has a really wide mouth to it. It's a lot more area for that interface, so it could potentially lead to a flatter drink happening faster. Not that it's a big thing, but it's something to be aware of. The next thing is how cold your liquid is. So CO2 dissolves more easily into cold liquids. So if you have, let's say, water at the freezing point, basically it's very, very cold water, and you have water at room temperature, the cold water will be much fizzier than the room temperature water. So obviously in a cocktail, you have alcohol really chill it down and get it really cold. That'll help bring in more CO2 into a liquid and therefore create a drink that's more fizzy. Then also related to that is that CO2 dissolves more easily in water than in alcohol. So if you just have a cocktail that's straight alcohol, of course there's water in it because it's not 100% alcohol in your spirit. So there is water in it. So even if you just tried to carbonate a straight liquor, you're not going to get, it'll still carbonate. Whereas if you have a lower proof cocktail you're making, so it's got more water in it, it's going to be more fizzy. So it's something else to kind of think about as you're trying to integrate carbonation into cocktails. And the last thing that really kind of can impact how carbonation plays with the cocktail is what's called nucleation sites. Nucleation sites are really just kind of imperfections, whether it's in the glass, maybe there's like an impurity in the liquid, where CO2 can basically form a bubble and collect itself, and then through that eventually the bubble will rise up to the surface and lose CO2 to the air. So if you had a glass that was theoretically perfect of all imperfection, your liquid had no impurities, theoretically you wouldn't really have any nucleation sites. But because we live in the real world, we do have nucleation sites. And so one way to see that is if I have a bar spoon here, and this glass here is just regular water. You put it in, obviously it's not carbonated, nothing's going to happen. This glass here is carbonated. You put it in, you'll see bubbles form on the spoon almost immediately. I mean, it's a very quick process. And then those bubbles, as they collect, will release up to the surface, and they'll, the CO2 will get released to the atmosphere. So one really cool thing about nucleation sites is, so if you take carbonated cocktail, any kind of carbonated liquid, as soon as you hit your tongue, you let it sit there for a second, you're going to start to feel all these little, thousands upon thousands of bubbles start to form on your tongue because of nucleation sites. It's a really cool experience you can play with in cocktails and drinks you're making. So carbonation is super interesting. There's a ton of science behind it. And I think, I urge you to go up and read up on it. I know when we get into cocktails over the next few episodes with carbonation, you really need to understand the science of it. And, I've learned a lot from Evan Wallace of Perlage Systems, because I think he really does a good job of, he does tons of research on it. He presents it in a really way that's really easy to understand and kind of helps you with the science of it. And you can, obviously, get really deep into the science. And I like to kind of have a good just base understanding so I can apply it to my cocktails and kind of understand, okay, well, I want to use this glass because it does this, or I don't want to use ice because it'll create the drink to go flat quicker. So just kind of having a good understanding is really helpful. And I'm really excited what we're going to talk about over the next few episodes around carbonation and cocktails and what it means and how it can impact the drinks you make. But I can't wait to get more into carbonation.